Have you ever wondered about the hidden meanings behind karate's most iconic forms? On this episode of Great Karate Myths, Debunking the Legends, we dive deep into the enigmatic Naihanchi kata, and specifically its unique fist. Why is this peculiar hand shape often ignored, and what does it reveal about the true origins of karate? Forget what you think you know about punching. This conversation will revolutionize your understanding of karate's historical function. Tune in to discover why this specific fist shape holds the key to unlocking the kata's original purpose. Tom, do you want to start us off?
Yeah. So the Naihanchi fist is a really good topic because it's the elephant in the room, really, when it comes to discussing Naihanchi, its original function and what it's become in karate styles. There's lots of suggested applications and theories about what Naihanchin's for that you can find, endlessly on YouTube and on websites and blogs and all that kind of stuff, and everything from pressure points to neck cranks and self-defense and farging and ground fighting and on a wooden Wing Chun dummy and all the rest of it. But one thing that ties all of those different suggested ideas together, or one thing that doesn't, is none of them ever explain what the Naihanchin fist is actually intended for. So it's different from a standard fist where all of the fingers are closed, wrapped with the thumb wrapping around the top two. In the Naihanchin fist, the bottom three fingers are curled in, but the top finger is left half open and the thumb wraps over the top of it. And it's very, very different from a fist that you might use to punch or strike with. And you can see a clear example of it in Gichin Funakoshi's Karatedo Kyohan, which was his master text for his style of karate. And so I think that's a good leaping off point, really. Why is that fist never discussed? So you can have endless explanations about the Naihanchin stance and pressure point strikes and neck cranks and what you do on the streets, but no one ever talks about that fist and what it was for. And it's really central to what it was originally for, which we'll get to at some point. But I thought we might start with where talking a little bit about karate history. Where did the Naihanchi fist go in terms of karate? What was it used for? Where did it go? So we've got Nathan hopefully will just leap into discussing Shotokai, and we've also got Motobu to talk about as well. So yeah, I'll hand it over there.
So just to clarify, we're talking about the Naihanchin fist. Very specifically, we're not, in terms of karate, we're not talking about the Seiken fist, the regulation fist.
No. And so the description is what sets it apart. The standard Seiken, all four fingers are tightly wrapped into the palm. And that became the standard karate punch. The Naihanchin fist, the forefinger, the top joint is kept straight and it's only bent from the middle knuckle. And then the thumb wraps around it. But we'll add a photo within the description that shows this. So if anyone that has practiced karate and perhaps not come across it, the oldest versions of Naihanchin, certainly extant in Okinawa, use a different fist from what you might find, say, in Wado-ryu or modern styles of karate, which essentially abandoned it, or it became something else. So, yeah, Nathan.
Yes. Okay. Well, it's kept this fist that Tom has described, in which the index finger is only bent at the basal joint and the second joint is left straight. So the finger's effectively straight. All of the other fingers are bent, and the thumb wraps around that basically index finger. Persisted. In fact, not only is it demonstrated as a fist clench one of two illustrated in Karatedo Kyohan. So for any book collectors, I think I'm talking about the Ward Lock British edition, 1976 probably. But Karatedo Kyohan, I think it's, that's why I looked it up earlier. I think it's page 17 that you can see the fist clench. What is interesting is that the translator, Oishima Sensei, Oishima Tsutomu, who was one of Harada Mitsusuki Sensei's contemporaries, they went back, those two. Well, actually, they went back and forth in a quasi-competitive way. That fist, that peculiar fist clench, anyone that's observant can see that Oishima Sensei is using that fist clench all the way through the photographic sequence of Teki, Shodan, Nidan, and Sandan. So in all three of those kata, Oishima Sensei is using that particular fist clench, which is curious to say the least. But it continued, and strange ways of clenching a fist occur with other. Well, I don't actually consider that to be strange. Let me rephrase that. Not that normal seikan is, as Tom described, with all of the knuckles clenched tightly and the thumb enveloping them. A strange fist shape was used by Motobu Choki, who allegedly and historically preferred or utilized something called ipponken, which is a one knuckle strike. And you could see this kind of one knuckle phenomenon being is exacerbated by appearing in Weichi Ryu karate and other styles, just taken as true as the mainstream. Yes, there's such a thing as a one knuckle strike. Well, good luck with that. If you don't hit an intended soft target, good luck to you and the damage to your fist. This, in my view, originates with the fist clench in the original fist clench for the Naihanchi, which actually is designed to accentuate the grip of the little ring and middle fingers in collaboration with the thumb, in which all strong grip, including printed swordsmanship, and Matt and Tom know this very well, being the swordsmen that they are. The index finger is always left out of such a grip equation for purely anatomical and physiological reasons, as anyone who's trained will know. So this is what's being accentuated in the fist grip for Naihanchi. I'll pass it over to someone else for a minute before I go on to the Shotokai. So if someone else would like to just jump in, and I'll come back to the Shotokai. So this isn't a monologue done by me. Matt.
Well, I mean, not too much, really, just to say that it's absolutely right. You know, when you grip something, for example, if you're gripping a weapon, for example, a sword, yes, the index finger plays a very minor role. Actually, most of the grip strength comes from the middle finger, the ring finger, the little finger, and the thumb in concert together. So yeah, to me, it makes absolute sense that if you were to make a fist with the index finger, you know, more straight than the others at the smaller joint, then yeah, you're quite clearly indicating that finger doesn't play a major role, and the fist you're making is symbolic of a grip. It's very clear. It makes absolute sense to start hitting something hard, making a fist that way. I think you probably do quite a lot of damage to your index knuckle.
Yeah, I agree. I've done bag work. I'm sure a lot of other people have. I've seen boxing up close. No one punches with their fists like that. They just don't. You'd break your finger for sure. It's as simple as that. I think it's well known as well, isn't it? So we've got lots and lots of different ideas and applications circulating for Naihanchi. But that sort of the Naihanchin fist, the elephant in the room, is ignored really, and there's no explanation made for it whatsoever. It's just it has to be ignored, otherwise the ballistic applications almost shouldn't exist. You have to make a modification in order to make their idea, make it fit their ideas rather.
And I wonder why, actually, I wonder what the explanation for sort of not addressing it is. Do people think that it was just a strange idiosyncrasy of Gichin Funakoshi, sorry, or is it, I don't know, is it one secret that's yet to be unraveled? I don't know why it's not addressed at all. Just put to one side, when really it's crucial, isn't it, to understanding what Naihanchi is for.
It's an odd kata to pick as well for ballistic applications. There's not a great deal of content, and it's all taking place in the mid-level, all with this peculiar fist shape. It's an odd choice for the stance. There's not really much footwork. There's not a lot of it's
And when there is footwork, you're just moving sideways.
It's sideways.
Yeah. And so you've got this limited content anyway, and you've got this peculiar fist shape. You've got to ignore something which is really central to it all, and it appears, as Nathan's already pointed out, all the way through the kata, in order to kind of force the street fighting applications or pressure points or whatever into it. So, and I think with just jumping back to Chokimoto, it's worth mentioning that I think one of the only kata he practiced was Naihanchi, which he practiced allegedly several hundred times a day. And so his karate kind of Naihanchi was central to his karate. And that his kosa ken, which his one knuckle type fist, might have been inspired by an adaptation of the Naihanchin fist. I'm not saying it was exactly that, but if Naihanchin's central to what he does and he's doing ballistic applications, it kind of makes sense that that could be the case.
Well, I'm clear that our topic is are the fifth strange hand positions that we find in anomalous hand positions that we find in karate. But it's also important to remember that Naihanchin, in the words of Nagamine Shoshin, in his Essence of Okinawan Karate, he said that prior to the creation of the Pinan, Naihanchin was actually the beginner's kata. It was to the Shuri school what Sanchin was to the Naha school. So this is a very important kata, and as Tom says, it's a bit odd, sort of only move sideways. Everything's basically done at the Chudan, at the middle level, although practitioners of Shotokan have an exaggerated raise of the fist in Teki Shodan, which actually doesn't occur. I don't want to get into a doctrinal dispute, but it doesn't occur in the original Shorin-ryu or Shurite Naihanchin at all. So there's nothing above the middle level in the entire kata, which is a bit strange, particularly if you follow the stories. Motobu had allegedly 100 fights in the Tsuchi, the red light district of Naha, I believe, and never lost. So I'm a fan of tall tales. They make for fun, but the fact is that Motobu had actually raised the hand positions for his Naihanchin, so he kept the correct stance, but he raised some of the hand positions to Jodan level, which you can see that's continued on into the Wadaru, the Japanese Wadaru style, because that so the founder of Wadaru spent some time studying with Motobu, and as did Nagamine. Nagamine Shoshin spent 6 months with studying with Motobu. Nagamine kept everything as it originally was, but Otsuka Sensei, the founder of Wadaru, raised the kamae, the hand positions in Naihanchi to Jodan, which historically had been had originated with Motobu in his attempt to not be struck in the head. So should this kata have? Should we all revise it so that the movements are Jodan? That's a rhetorical question. But back to the fist clench, I think I'm going to step aside now and let someone else comment, and then I'll come on to the particulars of the Shotokai fist clench.
I think that's sort of a good start, really, with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we often talk about is what's said about the kata and what people have thought the kata are for, but I haven't really encountered anyone else's explanations for what the Naihanchin fist's for, other than it being a method of punching or it somehow creates a stronger punch, which we all know is nonsense. I've never really encountered any other ideas. I suppose one question that might naturally come up from anyone listening to this discussion is, if we've said that the other antique forms are to do with weapons, why are we suggesting that Naihanchin isn't? And if that, which we are, and why is it not for weapons? That might be something worth answering as well.
Well, we can say it's nonsense, but there are going to be schools out there. There are going to be practitioners out there who do punch with that in that way and swear by it. You know, that's what they've known. That's what they've been taught, maybe from a young age.
Yeah.
It's not a natural fist. It's not a fist anyone untrained would create.
Well, I mean, I would, if someone's using that and they say it's effective, I would ask for what? What is the effect that they're suggesting it has? And also, it's not really an argument. If I've done it for a long time, doesn't make it right or useful. And so it's about what is that useful for? You know, the thing is it's really specific. So it's very unusual. And it's, as I said, it's key to the whole kata, which is grappling. You know, that Naihanchin fist implies gripping. You're gripping someone else by the wrists, the hands, and the forearms. And those sequence of movements, Nathan can go into a bit more, but that's what it's for. And so we're presenting it. What's that fist useful? It's useful for training gripping, and it has there's a physiological advantage to training that. To training that habit through a series of movements to keep a grip tight and coordinated as you work your way through different movements and positions. So there's a usefulness to making that fist shape and practicing it in a kata. I would argue there's no usefulness for that fist shape in a ballistic form at all. Yeah, I don't know if anyone wants to jump in there.
No, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, what came to mind, Shanir, when you asked that question was that people persist with trying to work out how to strike with that fist for the same reason that Wei Chiryu practitioners shove their fingers into buckets of different substances of different degrees of, punishment for your fingers to try and toughen the ends of their fingers to strengthen them for striking with the fingertips, which we know as well is rather more dangerous for the person doing the striking than the person being struck. It's just operating under a wrong paradigm, really, and not wanting to step outside of that ballistic striking paradigm, because that's what people have been told that karate is all about. It's about powerful striking. And if you take that as your starting assumption, then, an analogy we've used before, you try to bang in that nail with any tool that comes to hand, whether it's the right tool or not. So it's to my mind anyway, it's just operating under a wrong paradigm, not wanting to see the clues that have been left there, and grateful we are that clue has been left there, that despite its obvious lack of utility for striking, that fist has persisted, luckily, because that's rather an important clue as to what the Naihanchi is actually for.
Yeah. And looking at the form, I mean, the activities, when we practice it as a grappling, stiff arrest, series of techniques, the person is in front of the person doing the grappling act of using the techniques, not on the side. And in a combat sort of self-defense arena, no one fights sideways on, because you're limiting yourself to one arm. It just doesn't make any. And if nobody would ever see that in any of those, like the cage fights, whatever you want to call them. You will never see anything like that in one of those scenarios, because it's just not what it's for. I just want to clarify another word we use quite often when we say grappling, and when we talk about grappling, because that can bring about connotations of sort of pseudo wrestling and ground grappling.
Well, we're not talking about sporting grappling.
No.
So you've got there's lots and lots of different types of grappling here. But I suppose for Naihanchi, we'll link the video to the catalogue of wrist elbow in arm grappling that we're talking about here, and the catalogue of techniques that is in the Naihanchi. That's what we're talking about there, and probably leaning more towards something like civil arrest.
Yeah, I think that's a good distinction to make, actually. Yeah, we're talking about chin-na. We're not talking about, grappling that you might see in a BJJ studio or anything like that.
Yeah. It's just adding to Matt's point as well about we're really lucky that it's been preserved, because the fist shape could have been lost quite easily because of the lack of utility when it comes to ballistic karate, or it's also evidence that the function was lost, because nobody has suggested, not to my knowledge anyway, before Nathan and co discovered it, that it's for grappling. So that kata and that form has been preserved for a long time without anyone saying this is specifically a form of Chinese civil arrest or type grappling. And so, but it's been preserved, and so we're really lucky to have that lovely piece of evidence, that lovely component of that kata to support it's the story of that form, the transmission of it, the original function being lost, what it's become, it's being rediscovered and restored, and this sort of type of discussion around it.
Well, I'd like to add to that. It's progressed that. The curious that it's interesting. There's I think. Well, let me just start with the Shotokan emblem, the tiger, which was created by the artist Hon Kosugi. Kosugi did that. I think it might have been as early as 1923, but I can't actually remember. Sorry, I should know. But Kosugi also did I think he was the artist that did a line drawing sort of version of a fist, a clenched fist. But I think the original, I could be, excuse the dates if they're wrong, the 1923-24 Funakoshi Gichin Sensei's book, Red Karate Jutsu. And this shows a fist in which the thumb is towards the person viewing, and the index and middle fingers are protruding more than the ring and little fingers. And it's interesting that a similar image appears in an emblem, a badge that later cropped up with the Goju Kai, the Japanese version of Goju Ryu, pioneered by Yamaguchi Gogen Sensei. This particular, so this was a bit of a fad or a fashion. Now, my personal experience, which started it was in my teens, was Harada Mitsuzuki Sensei, who was the principal of the Karatedo Sokokai, the KDS, who was well, I have nothing but regard for him, and his type of karate was not, there's no way was it showy, it's not for TV or film, but there was he was incredibly sincere, and so was his karate. But the fist clench that he taught when I was first beginning karate, I'd had other karate experiences, but he said that the flat fist was wrong, and he showed me why. And this is not the theory or positive. This happened. I did the normal, regular shiken, the fist clench, in which the back of the wrist is flat with the forearm, and he just got hold of my wrist and just bent the fist down. Ouch! It was painful. Then he tilted my fist slightly upward, so that my index finger and middle finger knuckles were in line, not in line with my ulnar and radius, but in the middle of my forearm. So it was the classic Shotokai bent wrist, not overly bent, but bent, and the prominent two knuckles, the index finger and the middle finger, while the little finger and ring finger were really tight. So, in fact, the whole fist was meant to be tight. But this was very different from the Shotokan or the Shorin Ryu, or even the Goju, the stuff that I'd seen and experienced. This fist clench was okay. And then Harada Sensei then bent he couldn't bend my wrist or cause me pain. That convinced me. I had the understanding of a tyro, a beginner, a teenager, but he that convinced me, and that stayed with me for some time. Now, I'll come back to this point when we come on to pictures of Funakoshi Gichin Sensei, the founder of Shotokan Karate, because I think it's quite important to make the comparison that we need to make. So, I believe it's a true story. When Funakoshi Gichin Sensei, he was unwell, and when he was dying, one of his students reported the fact that they feared for the master's health, his life, because he sat at the end of his bed and practiced tsuki, thrusting punch, and he said, I believe I'm beginning to feel the true tsuki, the true punch. And that alarmed his students, because they thought, they said, never has the master claimed any mastery. And that's quite telling. My suspicion is, as we know, that the Shotokan school that Funakoshi Gichin, not by his own design, gave his pen name to, because Shoto was actually his pen name. It wasn't obviously his own name. But that had the usual Okinawan thrust punch and kime at the end, which we've already identified originates with the use of a weapon. Boxers don't use it. It's not necessary for a punch. And in fact, the Shotokai, I love it or otherwise, the Shotokai dispensed with the kime altogether and created what to visual appearance looks like a soft karate. But the punch went through, it wasn't halted. This is revolutionary, and this was brought about by Igami Shigeru, a very early prominent student of Funakoshi Gichin sensei, and he had strangely learned a soft punch from a junior called Okuyama. Okuyama demonstrated this to Igami Shigeru, his own senior, and Igami said, "Whoa, okay." He really took it on board. In fact, that was the creation of the Shotokai style. Now, to give this some time frame, correct me, anyone, I believe this was in the 30s. If you look at early photographs of Igami Shigeru, you can see that he's practicing conventional-looking Shotokan karate. He's in there mixing it up with Funakoshi Gichin sensei's son, I think third son, Yoshitaka Funakoshi, who's using that old flat fist, who's using all the sort of, in fact, he's probably the originator of those deep stances, like notwithstanding the fist clench that the Shotokai used was promoted by Igami Shigeru when he had a conversion to Okuyama's soft punch. Now, here's the rub, here's the bit, the important bit. When we see the picture of Funakoshi Gichin sensei, which is a public, it's out there on the internet, gripping, the person he's demonstrating with, I think, is Obata Isao, I think it's Obata, it's his trusty, one of his trusty lieutenants. He's gripping with his Funakoshi Gichin, gripping with his left hand, and he's throwing a punch with his right, in which it's clear that the knuckles are in the Shotokai formation. In other words, the wrist is bent. It's not parallel or flat, not in the way you find it in Shorinru or Goju-ryu or anything else. That wrist is bent in a way that, as far as I'm aware, only the Shotokai do. And you can really see the use of the Shotokai fist, which has the index finger and middle finger protruding, and the wrist bent. So unlike, and this would have been his lifetime habit to actually have the back of that wrist flat. So a twist punched with the ulnar and radius over each other, but the back of the wrist is flat in conventional Okinawan Shurite karate. This Shotokai fist is very different. The wrist is bent, tilted upwards, and you can clearly see that in this very famous photograph. Now, I don't believe this is a coincidence, and I tie that in with what I said that Funakoshi Gichin sensei said when he was at a very advanced stage, seated on the edge of his bed and unwell, and he said, I think I'm beginning to feel the true Tsuki. I believe that, or I imagine that he had changed, possibly under the influence of Igami Shigeru and others, maybe even Okuyama, to a soft punch. Not soft as in floppy or weak, but as a punch with no kime, no halting or focus, and a punch that used that Shotokai fist. I think that's perfectly possible, and for me, it's the most sensible solution to the problem. That if you look at early pictures of Funakoshi Gichin sensei and his contemporaries, they always have that flat fist. Although, admittedly, Yoshitaka Funakoshi. So Funakoshi, I think, is his third son, as I said earlier, does tend to have a slightly bent wrist. I think that may have occurred quite naturally from hitting things, and particularly hitting things that Westerners hit, as in bags, padded bags, sandbags, rather than makiwara. It's interesting. I know this from personal experience. You can easily hit a makiwara, a striking board, stuck into the ground and quite often padded with rice straw or anything of your choosing. You can actually hit that with your wrist flat in the conventional Okinawan fist configuration, the traditional shiken, but not so with a hanging bag or a boxing bag. Hit that with the wrist flat, whoa, you get pain and problems. So that's the case. I think that maybe through Yoshitaka, I think that some of the Shotokan had tilted their fist up slightly. The Shotokai tilted the fist up even further. And it's interesting that the Shotokai don't use a makiwara or a punching bag. They don't do either. And I think these are the factors that affect how a style or a group will clench their fist. On a finishing note in this section here, for me, if you're punching the solar plexus, you can afford the luxury of a protruded index and middle finger. If you're punching a hard object like a head or skull, or then you cannot afford that luxury. And the original Shiken of Shorin-ryu karate has the fist, the wrist flat, and uses just the top two knuckles. So there's what we see is a development. But I think that Funakoshi's Gichin sensei changed his idea and his practice in the latter days of his life.
So in the original function of Naihanchi, the grappling function, you need to have a flat fist. So you need that seiken like shape, nice flat fist and forearm, in order to ensure that you've got that grip nice and tight. If you bend your wrist back, you compromise the grip. And it's the same if you bend your wrist too far inwards, you compromise the grip. So the top two knuckles in line with the forearm bones, a nice flat fist, is what's optimal for tight gripping, which is in line with the original function. And so it makes sense that if the Naihanchin fist did inspire in some way the Shotokai fist or a one knuckle strike, as in the case of Motobu and things like that, they would need it to, as Nathan's described, change the alignment of the fist with the forearm to accommodate striking and hitting and impact and so on and so on. But for gripping, certainly, and in line with the original Naihanchin, it needs to be a nice flat seiken.
Well, that's an excellent and important point, Tom, and well made, may I say, that it's that the flat wrist in the Naihanchin grip, when you apply it anatomically, when you're gripping your partner or opponent's wrist, when you apply the pressures that you need to, just that fist being pushed into a straight position causes considerable discomfort to the person you're applying the lock on. And without that, they have a degree of traction left to them, which the operative cannot afford to give, because you don't want that person to escape from the grip at all, because the whole idea is to arrest them. So Tom's completely right. The original flat wrist seikan or fist grip of traditional Okinawan karate is completely Correct.
Grappling.
Yes, thank you, Tom, for grappling.
I think that is the reason to have a kata as well, because that's something that needs to be practiced. That sort of alignment and working through a range of techniques and sustaining it is something that it's useful to practice. So that the kind of utility of having a kata for locking starts to emerge as that understanding of that grappling function deepens, and you can feed again. Same with the weapons forms. You feed back your experience into the solo practice and work, keeping that forearm, that alignment of the wrist and forearm, the Naihanchi fist nice and tight, with the intention that you're locking, throwing, grappling, and so on. And again, it's what we're trying to emphasize here is that the fist is so important for the function, and that it's one of those things that needs to be explained. And with the antique forms, you can't ignore these things. You can't go, well, I'm just going to completely ignore something as obscure as the Naihanchi fist and turn it into whatever I want, and then sell it or whatever. I think it's crucial to understand everything. You can't say, if I'm going to translate this text, I'm going to skip every third word, and because I don't fancy it or I can't explain it. You've got to somehow arrive at a complete understanding of what has been preserved. And in Naihanchi no Okinawa, that fist has been central to it, and same in the Shotokan and its evolution into Shotokai and the rest. Yeah.
I think it might be worth pointing out the photo that Nathan was referring to of Gichin Funakoshi throwing that punch with the two knuckles prominent, as aka Shotokai style. You look at his left hand, the grip that he has on the wrist.
Yeah.
It's a rather good demonstration of what we've been talking about. He's got a nice straight wrist, and you can see that his index finger is playing a minor role in that grip. Which, and he's despite being advanced in years, he clearly has rather a firm grip on that arm. Yes, he's utilizing that grip in the way that we've been describing. His index finger plays a minor role. So I find that photo is actually a bit more useful to look at the left hand, actually, as a reference point.
It's quite a spectacular form and function, really.
Yeah. And again, looking at the context, looking at the grip, looking at the hand shape, putting it in the context of wrist grappling, arm grappling, not a frantic, chaotic, punching dance around someone.
There's no headbutting in it, and there's no sweeteners. You don't chin them first or anything to get them into the lock. It's asking something more of the person practicing it. It's asking them to develop a quite a high level of skill and the physicality required to do that type of grappling really well and efficiently without resorting, which Nathan wrote about in all these books about not resorting to a kind of extremely violent methods, because you could just as easily punch someone in the face and then put them in a lock. That would be a really easy, a simpler way of doing it, and in some ways more effective. But that's not what this method is pointing towards.
No, because once again, there's an ethic there. There's an ethic that's being embodied. It's about subduing and controlling limbs so that it doesn't escalate into something much more violent.
Yeah.
And in quite a dignified way, actually. You're not brutalizing the other person. You're simply controlling them and preventing them from escalating.
And that, for the individuals that would have used that, would have had to have been highly skilled and very fit, very strong. And, one of the top most important aspects of that would have been their grip power. So that's why the grip, the hand, the fist is central to Naihanchi. If you haven't got any grip power, you're not doing it. As simple as that. You can kind of get away with other stuff. If your stance isn't as good, or, it's not that it shouldn't be, but you can get away with other things. What you can't cheat on is the grip power. You just won't be able to hang on to them. So, yeah. That's the Naihanchi fist.
And that brings us to the end of another fascinating episode of Great Karate Myths Debunking the Legends. Today, we explored how the unique Naihanchi fist is a vital clue, pointing towards the kata's original function in grappling and civil arrest, rather than ballistic striking. We learned that its peculiar shape, often overlooked, is perfectly designed for a powerful, controlling grip, not punching, and that its preservation over time is a lucky break for understanding karate's true history. If you enjoyed this discussion, please subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with fellow martial arts enthusiasts. Thank you for listening.